Hello and welcome, members of the Wonderverse, to episode 16 of Into the Wonderverse, your one and only Scarlet Witch podcast. This time getting very festive with me, Hannah.
And producer Nick.
And let's get into it. So this is the first of 3 Christmas specials. And for Christmas this year, I am gifting you guys podcasts about the storyline that you have begging us to talk about. Can I just...
Are they the most requested?
Yeah,
storylines?
House of M and Avengers Disassembled are our most requested storylines to talk about.
Okay.
And my most hated storylines. So I always avoid them.
Okay.
It is the 20th anniversary of House of M next year, and it is the 20th anniversary of Avengers Disassembled this year, which makes sense that this might be the last episode that we put out this year.
Yeah.
All 3 of these episodes are pre-recorded, all in one day, so they will not have up-to-date news.
Yeah, just peeping behind the curtain here. This is all done in advance, so if you're listening to this on the 29th of December, we did not record this on the 29th of December, we recorded it on the 19th.
So if some wild news has come out since, sorry, not covered on here, can only talk about what we know right now.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about Avengers Disassembled in this first episode, and then House of M in the second episode, and then the third one is a bit of like Christmassy fun. So it's Christmassy
fun.
Yeah, even though I think that will be the one we release around New Year's, so totally pointless. But so you're sitting on the couch with me and producer Nick, and we are gonna. I'm gonna break down the Avengers Disassembled storyline. If you didn't already know it, I'm gonna do a quick run through, and then we're gonna talk about it, and I'm gonna essentially slag it off. Yes. So what you first need to know about Avengers Disassembled is that it was a 4-issue arc that was billed as the worst day in Avengers history and symbolized a reset for the Avengers and to some degree the Marvel Universe as a whole. Written by Brian Michael Bendis, it took place in Avengers 500 to 503 back in 2004. And what you need to know about this is, at this stage in Marvel Comics, the Avengers were not the most popular team. They never had been. While the Avengers now are probably the most famous superhero team in the world, they were not even in the 10th best-selling comics at the time. And while the Avengers had been having a relatively successful run at that point, they had been revamped a little bit with amazing people like George Perez had really made an attempt to modernize them. The Ultimates line was considered to be the much more popular and much more up-to-date and interesting set of comics. And so they were looking for a way to make them more relevant again. So the story begins when the Avengers Mansion sensors warn the residing Avengers that an intruder has broken in, and it is identified as the reanimated corpse of Jack of Hearts, who had died previously, saving the life of Cassie Lang, aka Scott Lang's daughter. The Jack then detonates, killing Scott, and destroys half of the mansion, and a Quinjet crashes into the side, only to attack the survivors of the explosion, and a small army of Ultron bots show up and attack the survivors as well. During this attack, She-Hulk goes absolutely berserk and, unfortunately, tears the Vision in two. She-Hulk running amok, and they can't snap her out of it. They kind of realize that she may be possessed. And the Wasp, Captain America, and Captain Britain are all sent to the hospital. And finally, a wounded Hawkeye ends up sacrificing his life to save his friends, destroying a giant Kree warship.
While this is going on as well, like there's the speech that Tony Stark is giving in front of the UN, where he starts basically insulting the ambassador for Latveria and King T'Challa, and basically is drunk despite saying that he's never had a drink.
Yep. Which brought to the light, like in the 90s, there was a massive storyline around Tony's alcoholism.
Yeah.
So bringing it back up was, I would say that this storyline very much brought to an end the golden age of the Avengers being these quite old-fashioned heroes with their mansion and their butler. And it was very much a post 9/11 comic. You've got the imagery of the Quinjet hitting the mansion at the very beginning, and in the end it's revealed that the Scarlet Witch is the one who created these random attacks. We're going to bring back up, obviously she'd gone nuts because of her twins losing them, and even though the children had obviously been constructs, the fact that the wasp brought up the children's existence had driven her mad again.
It was how she brought it up, though. That, I mean, we can get into this. We'll let you go over the storyline first.
It turns out that all of the things that we thought were like the Ultron bots, they were actually just creations by Wanda, and eventually Wanda is able to be defeated by Doctor Strange, and he explains to everyone what was actually going on. He's like, look, Wanda's nuts. And Magneto shows up and is like, give me my daughter, and takes her away. And so this kind of resets the team at the end because She-Hulk leaves, and like relationships end up kind of being given a second chance, and then certain team members like decide to leave, like Captain Britain goes away. And I want to say, like, I want to do a little bit more scene setting for people who don't know kind of the mindset going into this. So, like, the creator of this, Brian Michael, gave an interview this year actually to like talk about the 20th anniversary, and he said that like one of the things that he loved about reading the Justice League growing up was that the heavy hitters are all on the team. Like the most popular heroes are all on the Justice League, whereas for one reason or another, like the most popular characters at the time, like Wolverine and Spider-Man, were not members.
Because they're popular because of the movies.
Well, yeah.
This was the early 2000s.
Yeah,
so there was the movies. Basically.
Yeah. So, but you know, Spider-Man has always been one of the most. I'd say Spider-Man has obviously dipped in and out of the Avengers and the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, even because he is the most popular Marvel hero maybe of all time.
Yeah, I mean, this was also just after the John Romita Jr. Straczynski run, which was the run that I grew up reading, which I think is the best run since the 70s and 80s, personally. So it wouldn't surprise me that in the comics, at least, like, that is the most popular character. But then the thing about the movies were out.
Also, the Ultimates run was obviously doing a lot with Spider-Man and what that means. And I do think that 9/11 had a major impact on this Avengers storyline, especially Wanda being referred to as a mutant terrorist, when that had not come up for, you know, what you need to understand. I think because most people who have kind of grown up with MCU Wanda was not considered an anti-hero. She was a very solidly good girl. She was never morally grey before this point. After she joined the Avengers, she had been gaining more power and agency, especially in the 90s, and had led the ForceWorks team before she rejoined the Avengers. Tony comes to her and says, I am unable to run a team. I want you to head the ForceWorks team. And she just resurrected Wonder Man. And obviously the concept of chaos magic had just been introduced, and with the help of Agatha Harkness, she was training to like capture that power, and she was now a leading Avenger. But one of the problems was no one could agree on what should happen in her personal life. She would break up with Wonder Man and try and get back with the Vision, and then she just had a very, very weird dalliance with Captain America. And, you know, they said that, you know, the mental strain of having chaos magic was one of the reasons that she goes nuts. And during that time, she also manages to allegedly kill Agatha. The storyline was teased, but it was a very big change of pace. I just think that the image of Wanda that we have now was very much not one that you would have had in the early 2000s. You know, up until this point, like her past with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants was very much, like that's very much done and gone. I was gonna let you speak, but
okay.
Just like
so. That's your kind of plot. And
that's
background.
My like kind of like background information.
I literally read this thing today, and I have it in front of me right now. So a couple of things, just a couple of things, like, you know, just in general with the actual comic itself. The idea that Scott Lang just dies straight off the bat, like literally fourth page in, quite shocking. Hawkeye goes not long after and is again really quite shocking. The Tony Stark, when he's kind of losing it at the UN, he basically turns to Hank Pym and he says, "Shut up! Don't you have a wife to beat?" Which is a hell of a put down by drunk Tony. And then literally the page after, talking like 13, 14, this is halfway through the first issue. There is a conversation between Wanda and Tony where Tony is trying to come to terms with what is actually happening, whether he actually feels drunk. The way Wanda is drawn at this particular point, if you know the actual if you know the actual plot twist, she's completely in shadow. She is just not like seen really, like her face isn't seen. She's completely in shadow, and if you kind of get this idea that someone's working from the shadows, they initially think that it's Ultron because obviously the Ultron bots. And then like the Kree show up, so they think it's like something to do with like the Kree. And it's literally, as they say, it's the worst day in Avengers for the Avengers. The drawing, the art, I think is quite impressive in general. I do like the art of this. It's quite gruesome seeing like Vision's head melt. And then when he's ripped into by Jennifer Waters' She-Hulk, it's quite impressive.
What I think is interesting is we already have like the the sand filter that you get when you get terrorists in movies. Yeah, and She-Hulk obviously, like at the beginning of the comic, one of the first things she says is she like calls them pigs or something because they're making like a sexist joke when she walks into the Avengers mansion.
There's Scott and Clint Barton Hawkeye. Basically, Clint just turns around and says that he would bang Madam Viper, Madam Hydra. And like Jennifer Waters, and I think it's Betsy Braddock. Was it her? I don't know. Definitely Jennifer. And She-Hulk basically just calls Scott and Clint.
It was definitely. I think that there's
Janet.
There has been a lot of kind of perception, and I think that in this interview that I read, Brian was very much trying to move away from the idea that he didn't like the Avengers, and that it was definitely trying to kill off that old team so they could make the new Avengers team. And I think that there was a perception that he didn't like them, and that's why it was, because it does paint them in an awful light, this comic, and it paints kind of all of the old mainstay members other than maybe Captain America, because Thor is not really in it.
Thor, I think, died before this, like proper, like he died just before this, I think.
Because you do, like, obviously Ant-Man is killed. It's not Hank, but
no, Hank is Giant Man in this.
Yeah, and then you've got obviously Tony going off the rails and Wanda going off the rails and Clint being gross and dying. It really is killing off that core set of original Avengers. And the Hulk obviously, again, Hulk is
he's not around in this.
I don't know where Bruce was at that point, but
Probably. They do reference him because when She-Hulk is going full on feral, they basically say you're not your cousin, which only proceeds to make her more angry. It was one of the other things that's quite interesting, obviously, when you know the plot twist, but isn't brought up again in this 4-issue arc, and then isn't brought up again when we talk about House of M. Is that at the end of the first issue of Disassembled, there's the page where she is basically when you know it's Wanda. She's talking to herself, and she's having a conversation with herself. That's not brought up again. Like, it's not implied that it's like she's having this conversation with herself as though she has a secondary personality.
Yeah,
but that's never brought up again.
Well, they kind of brought it up. This is skipping way ahead in that in the Children's Crusade run, they imply that it was Doom controlling her potentially in this. In this scenario, they imply that it was Doom.
That was a retcon, though, wasn't it? Well, that was a retcon, but that was proven to be...
So many retcons. The issue, again, with this event and House of M is that it power-scaled Wanda in a way that we had not seen before. Obviously Wanda had been gaining power, and she had already done a bunch of impressive feats before we got to this point. But her reality, up until this point, her hex powers were way more prominent than reality warping. And so this set an entirely new kind of... This is Wanda's Phoenix arc, done very poorly. And when discussing it in this light, like, it just... Her wanting to take revenge on the Avengers just does not make sense for me. We had settled the Wanda and her children plotline 4 or 5 times at this point when this happened again. I think using Wanda for this was a bit of a cop-out in terms of they were like, what vague reason could we have for the Avengers team to implode?
So controversially, I suppose, for this episode, I didn't mind Disassembled. I didn't mind, in terms of the story structure, the reveal that it was in fact Wanda that was behind all of this. The whole idea that the reality, her powers have just shifted somewhat into a heightened level. I didn't have this. I didn't have the background that you do. So for me, this very much felt like one of those. To kind of pull from DC a little bit, one of those like New 52 things where they just reset every now and then, and they're just kind of like trying to figure things out. Like, remember, I'm a big Peter Parker fan, Spider-Man fan. Like, the amount of times his powers have shifted from, like, in my opinion, it's just the way these kind of things are. So they're just looking for ways to evolve the characters. What I have an issue with is that the reveal in issue 3 that it is literally a conversation between Janet and Wanda at a swimming pool at the Avengers Mansion, where Janet was revealed that she missed her period and thought that she might be pregnant and had this pregnancy scare, and she thought, oh God, I'm going to have Clint Barton's baby and we don't need Barton's, another Barton running around. And like Janet's line, and I quote here straight from the comic, this is where Wanda asks her if Clint and Janet are still seeing each other, and she says, and I quote, "That would entail the two of us having an adult conversation about our feelings, which clearly is not either of our strong suits. Can you imagine we have a kid who grew up normal in this environment? Avengers should not have kids. Superheroes should not have kids. That should be a rule. And you thought you could have 2. And then Wanda questions, what does that mean? 2 of what? And then Janet kind of walks away, just saying, oh, nothing. Oh, no, just had some margaritas. I'm going off for a wee. And then Wanda's just kind of left by herself, ruminating over that kind of comment. And that's basically the reveal of something's not right. So, and then it's later on revealed that Agatha has long been dead by Wanda.
Yeah. So
it's clearly implied that after this event, Wanda goes off to find Agatha, which, as you see in the next issue, and basically murders her after confronting Agatha about having these kids.
Yeah.
And then that kind of spirals on from there. We'll get into her mental state, obviously, when we talk about House of M, because that's very much linked to this. This is I think what the issue you have is with this is this is the introduction of her reality warping powers, very much implied that this is what's going to happen.
I'm not I'm not against Wanda's powers evolving. For me, it fundamentally, this starting with Avengers Disassembled and then going into House of M ruined her plot for years to come. She basically disappears off the face of the earth from comics, because how do you bring someone back from genocide? It's really difficult, and they've done loops and circles to try to do it in the comics, and we're finally getting over it now. I just fear it so deeply in any kind of Avengers and X-Men related media, trying to do it in animation or cartoon or anything, especially going with her new backstory. I mean, we'll get into it in the House of M episode, but the way that House of M cannot make sense with her new set of her new reality. I am all for reset moments. I mean, I know a lot of X-Men fans are very nervous right now with the end of the Krakoan era, and I do think that whenever comic books decide that they need a reset, there's always going to be people who don't like it. And, I think that MCU synergy has very much been something that a lot of comic fans haven't enjoyed. And the disparity between characters like Wanda in the comics and in the MCU has been a real problem. We see that a lot online, in terms of her being in a completely different place in the comics than she is in the MCU, and how some characters have really benefited from being brought to the forefront. We've seen such complex Iron Man stories since Robert Downey overtook the role, but I think that it's going to be very difficult to ever do. Well, I think in a way, I just don't think we'll ever do Disassembled in the MCU. I don't think it would bring anything to it.
No. So It's basically the reveal where Wanda is responsible for this is given by Doctor Strange, who basically shows up and says, "Hey guys, this is the work of magic. It's not by the work of anything else." Literally just drops it literally out of nowhere.
Like, where were you?
Where were you? But like he's astral. I think he's astral planing at this point as well. But he basically just says, and I'm just gonna quote what he says because this is quite a good. Whole thing. What would you call it? Like a speech monologue.
Yeah.
So he says, and I quote: "Please forget that we are talking about your friend and listen to me listen to me tell you the story of an orphan mutant with a sordid, violent past, with powers she did not earn nor can she control, powers she never fully understood. Can you understand the delicate mindset of a woman, a person who has control over reality? It means reality controls her. Imagination becomes the enemy. Structure disappears. Reality, eventually, as she knows it, starts to slip away, elude her, blur. Tragedy, conflict, tragedy. Drama, conflict, tragedy. They become excuses to change the world to fit the image that she has for it. Anything she doesn't like, she can change no matter how slight. People, places, things. Everything is hers to change. But every time she does that, every time she gives in to her desires, no matter how noble they may be, a little more of her slips away. She loses herself, her reason. But she struggles quietly every day to keep it in check, to keep it all together. For a person of strong mind and body, for a person of pure and spirit, the task of coping with these powers would be all-consuming. But here's a woman for whom, by the nature of her upbringing and chosen occupation, every day is stressful, chaotic. And after a life lived with lost love, violence, and drama, what does she do? She says to herself, I deserve happiness. I want to bring something into this world that is good, that I can love. And she gives birth to children even though she can't. She played mummy to make herself feel like someone she thinks is normal, and that ends tragically as well. If I told you a story like this, you say to yourself, this sounds like a person who has lost control of themselves on a deep psychological level. You say that this sounds like a disturbed person. Now, does anything I have described not sound like Wanda Maximoff?
I just take real issue with the presentation of women, like powers she's not earned. No mutant earns their powers. They're all born with it. I just really hate the handling of Wanda and with women and their mental health in Marvel. It's a problem. It's not even in Marvel. In comic book history, women and great power has created great hysteria. It is such a...
This is very early 2000s.
I don't care.
Yeah,
I know. We're not judging, but the thing is, it's a systemic problem that has continued. We are currently in the era, like now, third wave feminism was kicking off in the early 2000s. It's just so... Again, they're like, oh, she's a woman, so she didn't earn her powers, even though, like, no mutant has earned... I know that it's because reality warping was new to her. Like, chaos magic was new. But it just feels like such a repeat of the Jean Grey or poor, what's her name, Madeline Pryor, or Storm has this every once in a while where they're like, oh no, she can't handle the this that she's been imbued with, like, yeah. And I just think that also it's just for me, it's such a loose reasoning. They're like, oh, now the children and the baby stuff, like it was such a mess because nobody can ever decide. That's the issue when you have multiple writers, is some people like some things and some people like, other ships. Literally, the writers were having a ship war with themselves for about 20 years about Vision versus Simon, and then someone was like, no, she should kiss Steve Rogers. And it's implied that she like manipulated him into doing that as well, which is so like, again, like mind control had never been one of Wanda's powers before. Like the MCU has made it so kind of established, but mind control was not something that Wanda traditionally had done.
The mind control comes in through to House of M, which we'll get into in a minute. But there's a reason why that mind control comes into the world of comics. So that whole spiel that Steve Doctor Strange gives, where he says that it's not earned. It's purely come to her by accident. This is a thing that was recurring with Doctor Strange in the Excalibur House of M prelude comic, where he has this full-on thing with Charles Xavier. And I have an issue with that comic, but we'll get into that when we get into House of M, which I have a whole issue with that, where I very much goes into what you're talking about with women and being in control of their powers and stuff. What is I think powerful. I'm not going to say this is good, but what is powerful in its presentation is that this issue of the comic is presented with panels from the history of
I do
the
love
Scarlet
this
Witch,
art.
where there's literally like different iterations of Wanda, all just in this collage, and I think this is an attempt. I think this is an attempt by the writer, by Michael Bendis, who has looked at the history of Wanda and who's looked at the history of the Scarlet Witch, and just decided that this seems for him like the natural progression of her reality, of her character arc, where like she can no longer just be the, you know, like arm on the side to Vision or dating Wonder Man and just another one of the women of the group, like, which is basically what I feel from what you've told me, the kind of how her history has been, and like has seen the fact that she's had these children where she is like literally given birth to nothingness, like they don't exist, and they've been taken away from her and gone, well, hang on a minute, this is a traumatic event for her, like there's got to be some kind of reckoning with this.
It's just that we'd already like done that. What's interesting here is a lot of these panels are from the late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of these are not from her heyday era. Obviously this is, but there's a huge collage in front of me, and almost all of these are from later Wanda, especially the George Perez. You can tell by the design of her character. We have very little of her happy era with Vision or her golden, it's not the golden age of comics, but the golden age as an Avenger is not really represented here because it's so far from kind of what she had always stood for. Wanda was so about doing the right thing and always has been. Like, and I feel that they need, like, she was not considered a top tier Avenger in any way, shape, or form. And, like, that's fine. You know, I can let that go, she says grudgingly. They did not want her as the woman on the team going forward. And it was very much, you know, I think we took Jessica Drew's Spider-Girl was in the new Avengers.
Spider-Woman, yeah.
Spider-Woman, sorry, I can't remember who's Spider-Girl and who's Spider-Woman. It's the Spiderling, maybe?
Yeah.
She was not considered a good choice going forward, especially because Marvel as a whole has always struggled with mutants who are not X-Men. That has always been something that Marvel has never really known what to do with. If you don't fuck with Xavier, like, what you doing? Obviously, Wanda started out on obviously, Quicksilver has been allowed to go and join the X-Men team, but Wanda has never been an X-woman except in AUs and alternative universes, for those not versed in fan fiction talk. This felt to me like, if I didn't know that this was now such an entrenched part of comic history, if you explained it to somebody, it's giving fan fiction plotline.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, like I think this is the writer's attempt at finding a natural progression with the character arc of Wanda that they feel presents her as something that's more important than what she has been.
I'm gonna have to mention Wanda in the Ultimates run now. I do also think that Wanda had been burdened with the plot line from the Ultimates run and had become the butt of the joke in the whole the twins go Lannister.
Okay, so we're gonna end up doing the Ultimates, I'd imagine, at some point. We'll talk about that at some point.
People know this storyline though, and I think that again, people don't think.
I do not personally.
You don't know the twins smashed?
No, I do not know that. Now I do.
That had become a really huge deal. Is that
Did they have Folgers coffee? Is that what happened?
They have full on. Wolverine watches them get it on, and jacks off in a bush. And that was amazing.
I really I have my issues with Ultimates, like, as a reboot, because the things they did to Spider-Man, like those, but anyway. So that's Ultimates.
Adding context to that, Wanda had become, her and Pietro had very much become the butt of that joke. And it's very difficult to move on from that, especially because in their previous comics, Pietro is very protective, and there had always been people being like, that's a little bit weird. It's a bit weird that he won't let her marry people and that he's so invested in her love life. So they had smashed in the Ultimate run, like 3 years before, I want to say.
Okay.
And so that's what we were going. So
you reckon that this is an attempt to basically go, right, we messed up, guys. This is presenting Wanda as something serious. Because I think where they go with Pietro as well, like following, I think is interesting a little bit. He's very sidekicky.
Pietro and Magneto both get a very interesting arc out of Wanda's pain. Isn't that interesting? This is fridging Wanda. We're fridging Wanda here because she literally disappears from comics for almost entirely.
Not yet, because we haven't got that yet.
But yeah,
we're talking about Disassembled.
Yeah, but we have to discuss it in the context that they already knew what they were going to do in House of M, because they did. They had pre-planned that.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to reset the X-Men as well.
Yeah.
This is a giant Marvel reset. You have to remember that the Ultimates was originally... So the Ultimates is the other franchise that is running at the same time, which is completely AU. It's where Miles Morales originally comes from.
It was Marvel's attempt to basically reboot and to give like a new sense of life and a new sense of continuity, and it was massively successful.
It was billed, though, as possibly the last Marvel comic of all time, is something that was said before it became massively successful, and the Spider-Man and X-Men films essentially saved Marvel's image and what was going to go forward. And Fantastic Four? That's later. Is that later?
No. So Blade was first in 1998. And yeah, Spider-Man, X-Men was 2000. Spider-Man 1 was 2002. So,
because while Marvel didn't own the film rights, the fact that these films were successful was driving comic book sales, what is interesting to
First Fantastic Four film was until 2005, and that was after that was after Spider-Man 2 and X-Men 2, which were like the big successes.
So we've seen Marvel Comics basically get saved, and so the Ultimates does not have to be the last ever Marvel comic series, but it was so out there, very adult. Like, again, the twins are referencing being Lannister with one another pretty early on in those comics. We'll discuss that.
We'll get into the Ultimates.
But I think it's important to know that about Wanda's character and what had happened. Her and Pietro had very much become the butt of the joke. And the thing is that Pietro was possibly more beloved because, people love a speedster. Yeah. And was at the time the most prominent speedster, because who was thinking about Makari?
I mean, overall, I mean, like, what happens at the end is that Wanda is confronted by Captain America. She conjures out Red Skull and the Nazis, and then basically Doctor Strange shows up and basically puts her to sleep using the Eye of Agamotto. And then Magneto shows up as they're all trying to decide what to do. Magneto shows up and says, "I'm basically taking my daughter," and goes off, and the Avengers are left in the last issue of Disassembled. The Avengers are left, and they basically decided to disband. The mansion is left as it is. Tony basically turns around and says, "I've lost billions of dollars, can't afford to do this anymore." And then it ends with basically a vigil, the public kind of showing up, and a vigil being for the fallen heroes and the Avengers as they were. And there was a nice moment in that issue 4. So I'm just gonna bear with me 1 second while
Nick is
I'm literally
scrolling.
flicking through this issue. So there was a nice moment in this issue where they're all kind of sat around the table, stood around the table, and they're discussing their favorite moments. And for Tony, it's when they first put the team together. For I think it was, who's next? Janet was when they found Captain America, and for Hank, it was the moment where there was the Kree Skull War.
Favorite moment is a
Simon basically says, "This might seem a little terrible in taste to you, some of you considering, but I thought the Vision marrying Wanda was, well, it wasn't the most victorious moment or the most heroic, but it was the best moment. And I think I'm going to stick to my guns on this. I'm just going to decide to remember them like this." And
which is so bizarre. It's a beautiful illustration, but Simon suddenly being like, "I love Vision marrying Wanda," when he's been beefing about that for 40 years beforehand. It's so crazy to me now that Wonder Man and Wanda is almost completely absent from the comics, when it was such a major storyline of contention for 30 years. We had the back and forth between, does Wanda love Vision because he has Simon's personality, or does she love the Vision? Was this huge question that we have now essentially completely erased in the comics, and because he's not, I just wonder if that will all change when Wonder Man enters the MCU, or if we're going to really stick to our guns on Wanda and Vision, because it's so odd to have that absence. As somebody who's read, I read the Wonder Man series mostly for Wanda, but like it will be very weird if that just disappears from comic history altogether, just kind of gets like written out with MCU synergy. And that moment from the comics in particular, it just shows how much writers have influence over the way that characters are presented. Because Simon 5 years ago, before this, Simon a year, like even the turn of, in the 2000s, Wanda and Simon was one of the most kind of reliable comic ships. And it just shows you kind of, it's like how Tony and Pepper are now so tied together forever, even though they broke up in the comics, and Tony's now married to Emma. Well, not really, but he's married to Emma Frost. It's just everything is perception. It's why power scaling is pointless, y'all. Writers will write what they're gonna write, and they'll write your ships in and out depending on what's going on.
I want to kind of end really on this point for me personally about Disassembled, that Carol Danvers, Miss Captain Marvel, she like literally is out for blood for Wanda in Disassembled. And there's a point in the comic in the issue 4 where they're paying toast to their fallen heroes, to Clint, to Scott, and then basically they go through. Wonder Man says to the Vision, which I think you might find kind of funny, but like they end up going through all the fallen heroes, and then basically gets to Carol, and Carol says, "How about all of us Wanda too?" And like there is like I think a real attempt there by the writers to basically draw back the fact that like for them like the heroes, they may like have wanted to really portray Wanda as somebody to be hated, like the readers to hate Wanda for what she had done, but at the end of the day, something is clearly not right, and there is that element of sympathy underlying it as well. And I think I personally I liked the run. I didn't mind it.
Is that because Spider-Man's not involved?
I grew up reading. I wouldn't say I grew up reading, but I lived through Civil War. I don't have an issue with Avengers Disassembled personally. I went through Civil War as it was going on week by week, and that I do not like. But like the Disassembled, I didn't mind it. I kind of liked what it was trying to do, and I really did. And then when I obviously read it, and I was like, House of M's next, and we'll get into that in a minute. But on the next episode. My
final thoughts is that I feel that there is not enough justification for Wanda to have done what she did, what happened within this run. I think that it was very loose, especially like, her and Steve have just had this like romantic moment where like both of them are like, do we do this? Like it was very kind of like intimate and like tentative work, and then we go into this thing where she suddenly summons Red Skull and Nazis on him, and where she is in the comic at this point, we are talking about a Jewish woman. She's portrayed as Jewish at this point. It just feels distasteful. Well, it's such a destruction of her character.
But she basically summons all of the Avengers' past villains at that point, because she is found to be caring for Tommy and Billy, and like as children, and like the implication is there that she will do anything to protect her children, despite the fact that they don't exist, but she will do anything to protect them. And like that's what the implication is there. Like,
but I just think it's a destruction of her complete commitment. And over the years, she has been like, I will live and die as an Avenger. I will always put the Avengers above my personal life. That has always been her spiel. Yes, her and Vision went off and got married and all of that stuff, but like she had come to peace with it. There's a whole beautiful issue where she sits down by the river and she like says, even if I can't be with my children in this universe, like I am happy. I'm glad that I got to experience it. There is a beautiful, beautiful goodbye to that entire arc. And so to like throw it back in her face and to spit on her characterization as this person who you know, she is the moral heart of the team. So many times as Clint, the fact that Clint gets killed and like Clint gets a big like shout out when he's like one of the worst Avengers of all time. He spends like the entire 70s being moody because Natasha dumped him. Like, it just feels like let's pin all the blame on the mentally ill woman. And I just don't like it for the fact that it changed Wanda forever. We are never escaping the impact of this storyline. And I don't think there's necessarily wrong. It's not necessarily like, I understand why it happened. And I think that it is very much bringing the Avengers into a post 9/11 world. But I don't like the way it was executed. And I have a right to as a Wanda fan.
Yeah, no.
And I do not think that Wanda fans should be advocating in my comics for them to adapt this run, because you won't like what it does to her.
Yeah.
But that brings us, I think, to the close of Disassembled. You have been listening to Into the Wandaverse with me, Hannah.
And me, producer Nick.
If you cannot wait to see more of us, you can find me over on TikTok at Into the Wandaverse, or Instagram at The Wandaverse. So if the clock app goes away, you can always find me on the photo app.
You can find me on Blue Sky at Nick S. Chandler. My website is superatomovision.com, where I've recently written about early cinema and its relation to Wicked. And that was a snippet of Defying Gravity there. And I've also written about kind of an open letter to AI, if you want to give that a read. So yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you, the lovely, lovely Lily, for our amazing podcast art, and to Melanie Ray Griffiths for our music. And until we see you in the next episode, stay magical and Merry Christmas, everyone. And happy holidays.